Roe v. Wade has been overturned by the US Supreme Court in a landmark decision and something that has brought plenty of shock and confusion in the world. But what does this mean? What is the deeper meaning of this and how we can approach this without dividing further? Let's explore together. Before I get deeper into this video, I want to say that if you are of any sensitive opinion or opinion whatsoever, know that the purpose of my content is to explore together and to see what is right and what is wrong together. Because the concept of individual truth, I respect, but we need to agree what collective truth is, and the only truth that we all can coexist in is. So with that in mind, please observe this content critically, and if you do run into a biased opinion, hold on and stay tuned. First, the collapse of the hookup culture. Generation Z and younger generations are completely obliterated when it comes to dating and forming healthy, fulfilling relationships with one another. The evidence of this is the decline in marriage, the decline in overall health of the individual, and his or her ability to form friendships, relationships, and a society that pushes industry and that pushes consumerism to the point where the individual is encouraged to remain on his own and thus not necessarily even start a family. There is nothing inherently good or wrong about this. It simply violates the notion of a human being a social entity, socializing and forming strong bonds, which are the essence and the core of an individual, rather than his or her material aspect of existence, which is, of course, very important. With the decision brought in the US, we will observe that women are no longer going to be able to sleep around as much, and this same goes for men. But why this goes to be very important for women is that women are now going to be much more careful with sexual partner selection simply because they pay a much higher price. And the problem here is not the abortion itself. Let's take this a step back. Let us please take this step back to the step that leads to abortion. Because abortion is a step further, and we are not approaching this problem in a prophylactic manner, in a matter of preventive medicine, which is to prevent an illness rather than have to fight an illness once it happens. Not calling anything here an illness, but with that logic and with that approach, if we tackle the event that leads to an undesirable pregnancy, do you not think that we should then discuss the events and the situation and the philosophy and the morality of the situation that leads to the unwanted pregnancy happening? Or should we focus more on the abortion laws? Because that is simply branching the problem even further. What I mean by that is that it's much easier for us to sit and have a conversation on what is a unified way that we all can commonly agree on as humanity in terms of approaching copulation, relations, and how we engage with each other as partners, sexual partners, as to not allow for abortion to be an option at all, instead of discussing whether that's a woman's right or whether someone's right is being stripped away in that sense. So as I was saying, I believe that, personal opinion, that this will affect the hookup and dating culture significantly, because this will put more importance and emphasis on genuine human relations and whom we choose to have sexual relations with. Because if the focus is primarily on the pleasure aspect, masked as exploration or whatnot, then we are losing the essence of what life is, especially if we want to build a family, which is founded on a nuclear family and the values consisted therein, which is loyalty, faithfulness, not breaking that family, and keeping the family unit together. I'm not advocating this as the default and the right way but it is the way that works statistically, and as we see in terms of children that simply perform better and are better at forming lasting relations based on how they were treated and loved within a stable family unit. Now, I'm not naive enough to say that most families have it well. Most families that I personally had encounter with that are nuclear families that stuck together are highly dysfunctional. And personally, I don't even know of a single functional family that I have witnessed and seen. But that doesn't mean that we should branch and separate the family and go for individual needs if we are to engage in something together. Let me emphasize that further. Simply put, if you engage in a relationship with someone, it is no longer just about you. And we wish to think that because we push this notion of my truth, my needs. And that is, of course, always to be respected and cared for. That's why compatibility matters so much. Choosing a compatible partner, which takes a lifetime sometimes to find. The problem that needs to be resolved is whether the individual wants to remain on his or her own or engage into a relationship, which is reciprocal, which is transactional. And we have to accept the reality that if we are to engage in a relationship with someone, we will enter that relationship and exit it as a different person, and that aspects of us will be fundamentally changed. And that there are aspects that we need to bring into that relationship and aspects that give us from that relationship, that we need to change for a certain relationship to work, to adapt. And most people do not like this notion because they consider it to be self-sacrificial and unnecessary. That is exactly why relationships do not work. For a very long time, men played an almost insignificant role in raising children because, as per default, the man is not considered a suitable parent for the child, as observed by law and as observed by, in many US countries, for example, the default custody going to the mother and men having to fight for their rights if they want even a shared custody. Now imagine that, for a man to fight for a shared custody where the default goes to the mother. And in this, we forget that it is in the child's interest that both parents have, first of all, good relation with each other, and that is the core and the structure of the well-being of the child. And that then, focusing on that, we give both parents the chance. What the judgment, Roe versus Wade, or the verdict or the decision has done is it now simply placed more importance on what women choose to do with their bodies pre-conception and then in a pre-coital sense in terms of partner selection. This means that instead of women, and men are also have a role to play in this, don't forget that, instead of women choosing to casually have unprotected sex with men and thus risk a pregnancy, will now have to choose very carefully their sexual partners and if they choose to engage with them, thus not putting themselves in the risk of getting pregnant at all. This challenges many notions since the sexual revolution in the 1960s and puts women in a very peculiar position. But there is a side of this that is very supportive of this and that actually is highly traditional and that supports this way of building relations and family without branching and fragmenting so much in terms of having a high number of sexual partners, which again is not an inherent measurement of value of a person, but does play a certain role in terms of pair bonding, partner selection, and the ability to form long-term relationships. Without going into too much debate and discussion of how this will work, what this is, because I don't have a fully fledged opinion on that, I simply think it is nice to have in mind that such a decision might actually be beneficial for human relations and will allow us to take each other more seriously and to take family more seriously and to know that once we enter a relationship or a transaction of any kind, it is no longer just about us. It is about something else and someone else. It is Nietzsche who famously said in his Thus spoke Zarathustra, and I will read it for you. On marriage and children. You are young and desire marriage and children. But I ask you, are you a man who ought to desire a child? Are you the victor, the self-conqueror, the ruler of your senses, the lord of your virtues? Thus I ask you. Or do the animal and necessity speak from your desire, or isolation, or disharmony with yourself? I would have your victory and your freedom long for a child. You should build living memorials to your victory and your liberation. You should build beyond yourself. But first, you must be built yourself, square built in body and soul. You should propagate yourself not only forward, but upward. May the garden of marriage help you to it. You should create a higher body, a first motion, a self-propelling wheel. You should create a creator. Marriage, that I call the will of two to create the one who is more than those who created it. Reverence before one another, as before the willers of such a will, that I call marriage. Let this be the meaning and truth of your marriage. But that which is the many too many, the superfluous, call marriage. Ah, what shall I call it? Ah, this poverty of soul in partnership. Ah, this filth of soul in partnership. This miserable ease in partnership. All this they call marriage, and they say their marriages are made in heaven. A lot more to it, but one of my most favorite chapters from Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche, which I highly recommend that you read if you haven't. And if you haven't realized by now, there is no direct political implication to this content, but rather the invitation to explore what is. And we have to observe this together and agree or disagree as humanity on what the shared common truth is, because there is only one. Any fragmentation, any division serves no one. Please observe the content that I'm creating with a grain of salt, doubt, and a curious inquiry, and we will have no problem. And even if we do, you are very welcome to discuss openly with me everything that I explore. That is the purpose of what I'm doing. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around this long. If you made it to the end of the video, do come forward with your suggestions if you have any. And classic, like, share, subscribe. You'll probably see something popping up here. And see you in the next video. Bye.